Welcome, wandering travelers, and thank you for joining me on tonight's journey. Have you ever crossed the Sahara Desert? Or at least have you ever heard its name? In many people's imagination, the Sahara is a vast sea of sand, where the sun scorches the earth. The wind sweeps golden dust across endless dunes, and silence stretches all the way to the horizon. But tonight, I do not want to tell you about the Sahara of the present. I want to take you to a Sahara far older than that. A Sahara before sand covered the horizon, before the rivers disappeared, before this land became a symbol of dryness and solitude. Before we step deeper into that lost world, let me know where in the world are you listening to this story from, and what time is it there right now? Around 110 million years ago, this place was once a wet, deep green land full of life. Ancient rivers flowed through soft mud. Trees grew along both sides of the water. Giant fish moved through the murky current. Dinosaurs left deep footprints in the damp earth. And beneath that seemingly silent river surface, a shadow was waiting. Not rushing, not roaring, not needing to chase its prey across the land. It was Sarcosuchus, the giant ambush predator of the early Cretaceous. Tonight we will step together into the lost river kingdom of the Sahara, where water once gave life, but also concealed one of the quietest terrors of the prehistoric world. If you close your eyes and think of the Sahara, perhaps the first image that appears will be sand. Not just a little sand scattered beneath your feet, but an almost endless sea of it. Dunes rise and fall one after another, curving like waves upon an ocean turned to stone. By day, the sun hangs high in the pale sky, pouring down a harsh white light so intense that every outline seems to tremble in the heat. The wind that passes through the desert does not carry the scent of leaves or moisture, but dry dust, the salty taste of stone, and an emptiness that is difficult to name. In a place like that, it is easy for human beings to feel as though this world had never once been gentle, as though it had been born dry, as though the Sahara had always been a land of sun-sand rock and silence. But that is only the Sahara of today. If we could place our hands upon that layer of sand, then slowly pass through each layer of time beneath it, we would discover that the desert is not an empty space. It is like a very old book, its cover buried beneath wind-blown dust. Beneath the silence of the present are pages of memory, deeper, darker, and far more alive. There are pages that speak of mud. There are pages that speak of water. There are pages that speak of rivers that once flowed through a land where today there is almost nothing but sunlight and sand. And to begin the story of Sarcosuchus, we should not begin with its enormous jaws. We should not begin with the ambush, nor should we begin not yet with the dinosaurs that had to step toward the water's edge in caution. We must begin with the very world that created it. A world from a very distant past, around 110 million years ago, during the early Cretaceous. At that time, the land that belongs to present-day Niger, within the vast region of the modern Sahara, was not a silent sea of dead sand. It was a land of water. Not merely a few small pools struggling to remain in the middle of dryness, but real rivers. Rivers winding through broad plains, rivers carrying silt branches, soft mud, and the damp scent of a breathing land. Try to imagine the sun rising over the ancient Sahara, not a sun shining down upon empty dunes, but a sun blurred behind a veil of moisture. Morning begins with mist. A thin layer of mist lies low over the river light as the breath of the earth. It drifts through the bushes, along the banks, catches on the low branches, and slowly dissolves when the light touches the water. The air is warm but not dry. Within it is the scent of wet mud, decaying leaves, slow-moving water, and tree trunks soaked for a long time at the river's edge. It is a scent the desert of today has almost completely lost. A scent that says life is very near, that beneath your feet there is not dead sand, but soft earth capable of holding footprints. The river before you does not need to be crystal clear in order to be beautiful. It may be murky, brown, heavy with the color of silt. It may be so still that it reflects the sky like a blurred mirror. But beneath that quiet surface is constant motion. Water flows around roots. Water slowly eats away at the riverbank. Water carries fallen leaves, rotting trunks, dead insects, and particles of mud so small the eye cannot see them. At the bends of the river, the current turns slowly. Patches of floating plants or decaying leaves gather into dark clusters. A fallen tree lies half on the bank, half in the water, becoming shelter for small creatures. Above it, insects drift through the morning light. Beneath it, in the dim water, smaller shadows glide past and disappear. On both sides of the river are soft banks of earth, where every day a new record of life is written. Small footprints overlap larger ones. Long trails left by the tail or belly of some reptile stretch across the mud. Claw marks dig deep, then slip slightly down the slope of the bank. Some traces are still fresh, their muddy edges wet and sharp. Others have already been licked by the water, leaving only shallow hollows that are about to dissolve back into the ground. Some traces disappear within a single afternoon, as though the river does not wish to keep its secrets for too long. That is the strange nature of riverbanks. They remember and they erase. Each morning the mud tells a story. By evening the water may have rewritten it entirely. If you move a little farther away from the water's edge, you will see the land opening into low flats, floodplains, places where rising seasonal waters may cover everything beneath a shallow layer. When the water recedes, it leaves behind darker, richer, softer ground. From there, plants begin to grow. Low vegetation spreads in green patches. Bushes crowd together near the damp areas. Larger trunks stand a little farther away, their roots gripping deep into the earth, their canopies casting shade over the riverbanks. The ancient Sahara was not a dense jungle like something from an exaggerated adventure tale. It was a riverine world changing with the terrain and the rhythm of the water. Some places were thick with vegetation. Some opened wide into muddy flats. Some were nothing more than quiet, low marshes. In some places, the water moved faster, cutting through the bank and exposing old layers of sediment. In others, the ground was drier, cracked lightly beneath the sun, waiting for the next season of water to soften it again. Today's riverbank could become tomorrow's riverbed. A mud flat today could become the path of a large animal next week. A river branch could gradually fill with silt, forcing the water to find another route, opening a new bend, and leaving behind shallow pools where smaller forms of life would have to adapt quickly. Water decided where plants grew. Water decided where the mud stayed soft. Water decided which paths were safer, which places were easier to become trapped in, where fish would gather, where thirsty animals would be drawn, and where many creatures that did not wish to meet one another would nevertheless be forced into the same place. During the high water season, the ancient Sahara could become almost unfamiliar even to itself. Lowlands sank beneath layers of murky water. Familiar paths disappeared. Grassy banks became shallow wetlands. Branches drifted slowly across the surface. Smaller creatures sought higher ground. Larger animals had to choose different routes, stepping carefully over earth that had softened after many days of soaking. During the low water season, the river drew itself inward. Wide bands of mud were exposed beneath the sun. Pools became separated from the main current, lying still across the riverbed like dull, cloudy mirrors. In some places, the water grew so shallow that fish became trapped, stirring weakly in thick mud. In others, footprints multiplied across the bank because every living creature was drawn toward the remaining water. And at those moments, the riverbank became more important than ever. In a vast land where water was not evenly spread, the river became the center. Every invisible road could lead back to it. Plant-eating animals needed water and the young vegetation along the banks. Smaller creatures needed shelter. Fish eaters needed the current. Predators needed the place where prey was forced to appear. And through many seasons, many years, many generations, that world was organized around one simple truth. Everyone needed water. Perhaps if you stood very still on a high bank in the afternoon, you would see it more clearly. The light begins to tilt. Gold falls upon the river's surface, breaking into small fragments across the ripples. The shadows of trees stretch longer. The air grows softer. Far away on an old path, damp dust is stirred very lightly. A group of large creatures is moving toward the river. They walk slowly without hurry, as though they have known this road for a long time. Perhaps their ancestors passed this way. Perhaps earlier herds left behind scent footprints and some vague memory of experience in the instinct of their kind. A quiet body of water may be a place to drink. A tree's shade beside the bank may be a place to rest. A soft mud flat may be a place to find food. But at the same time, all of these places can also become stages for danger. Nature does not separate beauty from cruelty. It places them side by side, sometimes only a few steps apart. A young shoot growing near the water's edge. A swarm of insects glittering in the sun. A river surface so still it seems harmless. And beneath all those gentle images, there is always the possibility of a movement the eye cannot see. Look more closely at the ground. Beneath your feet, mud is not merely mud. It is memory being formed. Each layer of settling mud may cover a leaf, a small bone, a footprint, a fragment of shell, or a piece of a tree trunk. Over time, if it is fortunate, these fragile things may be buried, compressed, replaced by minerals, and eventually become fossils or traces within stone. The river does not know that it is preserving history. It simply flows. But because it flows, because it lays down mud, because it covers what has fallen, it accidentally becomes the keeper of a world that will later vanish from the surface of the earth. Millions of years later, when there is no longer morning mist, no soft muddy bank, no riverside trees, no sound of giant creatures walking, those layers of earth and stone will be what remains. What was once soft will harden. What was once alive will become a trace. What once moved will lie still in stone, waiting for a human hand to find it. And so, when we look at the Sahara today, we should not see only emptiness. That emptiness may be only the final surface of a very long story. Before sand there was stone. Before stone there was mud. Before mud there was water. And before the silence of the desert, there was a world once filled with sound. Try to listen to that world one more time. The sound of water moving slowly around a bend. The sound of leaves brushing together in damp wind. The sound of mud sinking beneath the weight of a large foot. The endless hum of insects in the late afternoon. The sound of something falling into the water, creating a small ring of ripples before everything becomes still again. The silence of the ancient Sahara was not like the silence of the desert today. It was not the absence of life. It was the silence of waiting. A pause between two movements. A very brief second before a branch trembles, before the surface of the water stirs, before a herd passes across the mudflat. And because of that, this world had a very special rhythm. It was slow but not dead. It was quiet but not empty. It was beautiful but not safe. In the light of sunset, the river could appear so peaceful that one might forget it was the place where every need for survival gathered. Water soothed thirst. Water fed plants. Water held fish. Water opened paths for swimming creatures. But water also concealed. It blurred vision. It swallowed sound. It turned a submerged tree trunk into a shadow difficult to recognize. It made the boundary between lifeless object and living creature uncertain. In a world like that, if the water was just a little murky, if the riverbank was just a little low, if an animal stepped a little too close, then the river was no longer merely scenery. It became a border. On one side was land, where the light was clearer, where the feet could feel the path, where the shapes of things were still fairly visible. On the other side was water, where forms were distorted, distances difficult to judge, sounds softened, and where anything could come from beneath. That boundary will become important in our story. But for now, let it remain a quiet boundary. Let the ancient creatures continue to pass along the riverbank, unaware that millions of years later, we would look back upon this place with curiosity and wonder. Let the water continue to flow over soft mud. Let the leaves continue to fall and drift away. Let the footprints continue to press into the damp earth, then be erased by the next season of water. Because this world did not exist in order to become fossilized. It was once its own present. A real morning, a real afternoon, a real flood season, a real dry season. Rains heat rivers, changing course creatures being born, growing, hunting, fleeing, dying, and returning their bodies to the mud. That is what gives the past its depth. It is not only a frozen picture in a book. It once moved day by day, hour by hour, with every rhythm of the water. And then time passed. Not in a single moment. Not in one disaster that could be seen clearly from beginning to end. But through changes so long, so slow, and so difficult to notice if you lived only one short lifetime. Rivers changed course. Climate shifted. Lands rose or sank. Layers of mud were buried deeper. Trees disappeared from one place, then appeared in another. Creatures once familiar to those riverbanks slowly ceased to be there. One world gave way to another. After many millions of years, what had once been water floodplain and damp lowland was gradually covered by new stories of geology and climate. Sand arrived. Wind arrived, dryness arrived. The desert expanded. Footprints no longer pressed into mud because mud no longer lay exposed as it once had. Ancient rivers withdrew into the memory of stone, and the place that had once echoed with water became a land that human beings would later call the Sahara. But the Sahara did not erase its past. It only hid it. Hid it beneath sand, hid it in stone, hid it in layers of sediment lying silent beneath the dry surface. And from time to time, when the wind exposes a fragment of bone, when rock cracks open to reveal an old trace, when paleontologists bend down in the desert and realize that what they are touching does not belong to the present world, the past opens its eyes again. A fossil fragment in the Sahara is not merely a hard, old, lifeless object. It is proof that this place was once different, that sand was once mud, that silence was once sound, that dryness was once water, that beneath the sky where today there is only hot wind and white light, ancient rivers once flowed, carrying the life of a lost kingdom. And in that kingdom there was a river. That river did not only feed plants, did not only hold fish, did not only guide giant creatures through the damp land, it also created a kind of power very different from the power of the land. A power that did not need a roar, did not need speed across the plain, did not need to appear in the light. It was a power belonging to patience, concealment, and the ability to wait in murky water. That is why we must begin with the Sahara before it became a desert. Because if we look at Sarcosuchus only as a giant creature, we miss half the story. We forget that every predator belongs to a place. Every body is an answer to an environment. Every tooth, every layer of armor, every habit of lying motionless in the water was shaped and sharpened by the world around it. Sarcosuchus was not a nightmare that fell from nowhere. It was a child of ancient rivers, of soft muddy banks, of rising and falling waters, of lands where life had to come close to water in order to survive. And so, as we step into this story tonight, keep that image in your mind. Not the Sahara of caravans beneath the sun. Not the Sahara of dunes and dry stone. But a Sahara greener, wetter, older. A Sahara where rivers flowed. A Sahara where mud held footprints. A Sahara where morning moisture hovered over the ground. A Sahara where every riverbank was both a gathering place for life and the beginning of a quiet danger. And when the sun finally sinks behind the low trees of the early Cretaceous world, the river grows darker. The surface no longer reflects gold, but turns a deep copper shade. Small rings of ripples spread and disappear. The mudflat cools. The sound of insects thickens in the dark. Far away, a large creature passes by, leaving deep footprints near the water's edge. The river still flows slowly, murky, peaceful on the surface. But beneath that peace, the true kingdom of Sarcosuchus has only just begun. Once we have seen the Sahara before it became a desert, once we have heard the sound of water flowing through a land where today only sand and wind remain, the next question begins to rise quite naturally in that river world. Who lived there? What creatures stepped across those soft, muddy banks? What shadows swam beneath the murky water? And what made that ancient river one of the most fertile, yet also one of the most dangerous places of the early Cretaceous? Imagine that we are standing on a high bank looking down over the damp floodplains of ancient Niger. The river below does not lie still like a single ribbon of water. It splits into branches, bends in wide curves, spills into lowlands, then gathers itself again into deeper channels. In some places, the water is dark and quiet, shaded by trees along the bank. In others, it widens into shallow stretches, reflecting the morning light, like a mirror made of mud. In some places, the riverbank has been trampled by countless feet until the soft ground has become a dark, slippery path filled with tracks. This river is not merely a background. It is the heart of the entire land. Everything seems to turn around it. Plants grow because of water. Fish live because of water. Herbivores come because of water and the vegetation along the banks. Predators come because prey gathers here. And so if we look closely enough, we will see that the river is like a great nameless road where countless creatures pass by touch, one another's worlds avoid one another, compete with one another, and exist together in a fragile balance. At the edges of the shallow waters, low vegetation grows thickly. It does not resemble the modern forests we are familiar with, but it is still enough to create a green, humid world filled with shade and the scent of decaying leaves. Patches of low plants cover the ground near the bank. Taller trunks stand silently farther away, their roots gripping the damp soil. When the wind passes through leaves, brush against one another with a soft, quiet sound, like a whisper stretching along the riverside. Beneath the shade, insects drift in thin swarms. Small creatures slip into the grass and mud. On the ground, new footprints appear before the old ones have had time to dry. In that world, plant-eating dinosaurs are not distant silhouettes. They are a familiar part of life along the river. Some move slowly, heads held low, feeding close to the ground. Some have heavier bodies, leaving deep footprints in the muddy bank. Some travel in small groups, while others spread out among the low vegetation, calmly grazing on the plant life that the river has nourished. They do not need to know that millions of years later, humans will call them by scientific names. To them, this world is simply a place to live, a place with food, water paths, the scent of the herd, and dangers always hidden just beyond sight. Among those herbivorous creatures, we can imagine Nigersaurus as one of the most distinctive figures of this land. It is not the tallest dinosaur, nor the most ferocious. On the contrary, its strangeness lies in the way its body is adapted to life close to the ground. Its wide mouth, low head, and constantly replaced teeth all make it seem like a creature designed to quietly harvest the low-growing plants of the damp earth. Picture a morning when mist still hangs over the floodplain, and a small group of Nigersaurus slowly moves through the vegetation along the river. They lower their heads, bring their muzzles close to the ground, and graze on soft strips of plant life. Each step is not powerful, like the stomp of a ruler, but steady calm, almost gentle. But gentleness does not mean safety. In such a crowded ecosystem, every herbivore is part of a larger flow of energy. Plants draw nutrients from soil and water. Dinosaurs feed on plants. Predators watch for the weaker, smaller, slower, or more careless individuals. There is no cruelty in that. There is only the law of ancient life, quietly operating beneath the sun. A young animal wandering too far. An injured individual falling behind. A herd forced to cross an area where the mud is too soft. Small moments like these can become opportunities for others. A little farther away, in more open stretches of land, other herbivores may also be seen sharing this world. Ouranosaurus, with its distinctive shape, moves across the plain with firm, heavy steps. Lordosaurus, low-bodied and strong, passes like a slow, living mass among mud and plants. They are not alike. They do not eat exactly the same things. They do not move in exactly the same way. Yet all of them depend on a shared network, riverside vegetation water sources, enough space to feed, and seasons that repeat again and again across generations. Because many herbivorous species live in the same region, the riverbank is never completely still. On some mornings, a floodplain may be filled with footprints. On some afternoons, the path down to the water may be crushed by many large bodies passing through. Along certain stretches of bank, low plants have been grazed close to the ground. In some places, the mud has been churned into a dark, soft mass, where new footprints overlap old ones, making the earth look like a layered map of life. If we could bend down and read that mud, we would see a wordless story here a herd passed through. There a young one slipped. A little farther away there are traces of a reptile, and closer to the water's edge are long marks left by a creature that once dragged itself across the soft ground. But the river does not belong only to those who walk on land. Beneath the murky water, another world is also moving. Large fish swim through the deeper stretches, passing among submerged roots and rotting trunks. Some have heavy bodies and hard scales, moving slowly but steadily through the water. Smaller species glide in groups, turning suddenly when some shadow passes beneath them. In shallower bends of the river, fish can become trapped in pools when the water recedes. In the deeper channels, they become an important food source for predators that know how to use the current. A river full of fish will draw fish-eating creatures. And in the early Cretaceous, that did not mean only small animals. Along this ancient riverbank, Suchomimus is one of the names that most easily pulls the imagination with it. It is a large predatory dinosaur, but not entirely like the familiar image of predators that simply charge across open plains to bring down prey on land. With its long snout and form connected to waterside environments, Suchomimus makes us think of a hunter walking along the riverbank, watching the surface, searching for fish or for other opportunities that the river might offer. Imagine it appearing in the late afternoon. The sun is already low. The soft mud of the bank is marked by large footprints. Suchomimus walks close to the water's edge, its body stretched long, its head slightly lowered. It does not need to run. It moves slowly, like a hunting shadow, listening to the river. Each time the water stirs, its eyes may turn toward that movement. A large fish thrashes near the bank. A ripple rolls through the shallows. A small opportunity appears, then disappears. In this world, hunting is not always a roar and a chase. Sometimes it is attention. It is patience. It is the ability to read very small signs on the surface of the water. But Suchomimus is not the only one watching the river. That is what makes this world so tense. A place rich with life will never have only one predator. There are reptiles living near the water. There are turtles in marshy areas and slow bends of the river. There are smaller crocodiliforms quietly crawling across the muddy bank or hiding in the shallows. There are flying reptiles gliding above, observing the river surface and floodplain from another layer of space. Each species has its own position, its own way of feeding its own range of danger. But together, they make the river a dense network of opportunity and risk. Seen from above, that world would resemble a broad painting. The river curves through the plain. At one bend, fish gather in deeper water. Nearby turtles lie motionless on warm mud. A herd of herbivorous dinosaurs moves farther away toward the low vegetation. A land predator walks along the bank, leaving clear tracks in the wet earth. Overhead, the shadow of a flying reptile glides across the water, startling the smaller creatures below for a moment. Everything moves at once, but not in chaos. They are different threads woven into the same ecological tapestry. What is remarkable is that no species is truly separate from the others. A dead fish washed onto the bank may feed smaller creatures. A tree trunk fallen into the water may create shelter for young fish. Herbivorous dinosaurs change the vegetation along the river as they graze and trample low plants. Predators make the herds more cautious, forcing them to move in groups or avoid certain paths down to the water. Turtles, fish, reptiles, insects, plants, and mud are all connected by threads that are very difficult to see if we focus on only a single animal. And that is why this chapter matters. If we look only at one giant creature, we might imagine that prehistoric stories are nothing more than confrontations between monsters and prey. But the deeper truth always lies in the ecosystem. A predator does not become frightening out of nowhere if there is no prey around it, no water, no place to hide, no seasonal rhythm, and no repeated opportunities that can turn a survival strategy into an advantage. An herbivore is not merely food in the eyes of another creature. It is a living being with habits, needs, paths, choices about where to feed, and ways of responding to danger. A river is not merely water flowing over stone and mud. It is the stage where all these lives meet. At noon, when the sunlight falls more heavily, the river may become slow and thick, as though asleep. Heat rises from the damp bank. Herbivores seek shade or softer patches of vegetation. Insects thicken in the air. Fish descend into cooler stretches of water. Predators also lower their rhythm, waiting for more favorable moments. But that stillness is only the surface. Beneath it, every creature is still calculating in its own way. Where there is water, where there is shade, where there is an unfamiliar scent, where the mud is too soft, where it is better not to go. By afternoon, when the light softens, the riverside awakens in a different way. Herbivore herds begin to move more. Smaller creatures emerge from hiding. The water surface shows more ripples. A large fish may leap up, flashing for an instant, before falling back and scattering water. A reptile crawls across the muddy bank, its body leaving a long trail behind it. Far away, Suchomimus appears again, silent, along another stretch of riverbank. The air is not necessarily more dangerous now, but everything is closer together. The needs to drink, feed, move, and hunt begin to overlap. When many species use the same river, conflict does not necessarily unfold as a great battle. It may be quiet avoidance. A herd of herbivores changes direction because it smells a predator. A fish vanishes from shallow water when a large shadow passes by. A small reptile leaves a stretch of bank when a larger creature approaches. A predator gives up a section of river not because of fear in the human sense, but because in nature, avoiding injury can also be a form of wisdom. Life does not continue only through strength. It continues through the ability to choose the right moment, the right distance, and the right temporary zone of safety. That ancient river is therefore like a city without language. Each species has its own road. Each time of day has its more visible inhabitants. Morning belongs to mist insects and slowly moving herbivore herds. Noon belongs to shade, deep water, and rest. Afternoon belongs to movement back toward the water's edge. When night falls, the world changes hands again. Sounds become thicker. Vision narrows. Smaller creatures slip away. Those accustomed to moving in darkness may begin to gain the advantage. All of this makes the river a place both familiar and impossible to fully predict. The creatures living here may know a bend of the bank, a path, a patch of vegetation, a shallow pool. But no knowledge can guarantee absolute safety. The river changes, the mud changes, water levels change, predators move, prey move as well. A place that was quiet yesterday may be filled with tracks today. A descent to the water that was once safe may become deep mud after a flood season. A fallen tree may shelter fish, but it may also hide something larger. And here we begin to sense the foundation of the larger story. Sarcosuchus does not yet need to step into the center. It is enough to know that a river like this, with large fish, herbivorous dinosaurs, waterside reptiles, predators, walking along the bank, soft mud and murky water, is exactly the kind of place that could nourish a giant ambush predator. Not in some mystical way, but through the clear logic of nature. Many forms of prey come close to the water. Many opportunities appear at the river's edge. Water hides shape. Mud slows footsteps, and the repetition of such moments across millions of years can create predators perfectly adapted to the boundary between land and water. But before the name Sarcosuchus truly rises as the main figure of tonight's story, let us remain a little longer with the river and its inhabitants. Look at the herbivore herds lowering their heads to graze in the afternoon light. Look at the fish stirring in the deep water. Look at the turtles lying still like living stones on the mudflat. Look at the shadow of Suchomimus passing along the riverbank without haste, without noise. Look at the small rings of ripples spreading and vanishing like brief signs from a world that never stops moving. The early Cretaceous in this land was not a simple scene. It was a dense living network where every creature was both a user of the river and a part of another creature's story. Herbivorous dinosaurs needed water and plants. Fish needed the current. Reptiles needed mud banks, shallow pools, deep water, sunlight, and darkness. Predators needed carelessness, weakness, or simply a moment when the distance became close enough. And when dusk falls over the ancient river, all those layers of life seem to blend together. A soft red light settles over the floodplain. The smell of damp mud grows heavier in the air. The sound of insects stretches into a steady background. A herd of dinosaurs moves farther away from the water's edge. A large fish stirs the river surface, then dives out of sight. A hunting shadow stands motionless for a moment among the reeds. And the river, as it has done since long before any human being ever gave it a name, continues to flow. It flows past trees, past footprints, past bones, scales, teeth, mud, and memory. It connects creatures very different from one another into the same rhythm of life. It feeds them, tests them, shelters them, and sometimes swallows them. This is the river of the early Cretaceous, where dinosaurs, giant fish, and predatory reptiles shared one world. And in that world, beneath the murky water, now darkening a greater power, is waiting for the moment when it will be named. After we have passed through the river world of the ancient Sahara, after we have seen the soft mudflats, the herds of plant-eating dinosaurs, the large fish beneath the water, the predators moving along the riverbank, and the dense life gathering around the current. Only now can we allow the main figure of this story to slowly emerge from the darkness, not loudly, not hurriedly, not with a roar that shakes the entire riverside forest. Sarcosuchus appears in the way of a creature that belongs to water. At first, it is only a very vague shape beneath the murky river surface, a long dark streak lying close to the riverbed, a silent mass among slow-moving streams of silt. Then gradually, if the light is low enough and the water still enough, we may begin to recognize the long snout near the surface, the eyes set high, and the rough back almost blending into mud, rotting wood, and the shadows of the trees along the bank. This is not the image of a predator that must always run, always display its strength, always prove its presence upon the land. Sarcosuchus does not need to do that. The river has given it a different kind of power, the power of stillness, the power of a gigantic body that can vanish before the eyes of its prey simply by sinking a little deeper, the power of a creature that does not need to occupy the entire plain, only the places every other living thing is forced to approach. Its name, Sarcosuchus, is often understood as flesh crocodile, a name that sounds both ancient and cold. But if we simply call it a giant crocodile, we can easily imagine it incorrectly. It is not a modern crocodile, enlarged and released into the world of dinosaurs. It belongs to an older branch within the great family of crocodile-like reptiles, a giant crocodiliform that lived during the early Cretaceous, when the Earth was still far from the world we know today. And in the ancient river of Niger, it was a presence that could not be taken lightly. Try to imagine its size through things that feel closer to us. An adult Sarcosuchus could be as long as a small bus, or far longer than the room you may be sitting in. If it were laid out along a village road, its tail might still be far behind, while its head had already reached in front of you. Its long skull was like a heavy door of bone lined with teeth. Not the thin knife-like teeth meant to slice prey into pieces, but strong, sturdy teeth like sharp stakes meant to hold clamp lock and prevent whatever had been caught from escaping easily. There were many large ancient creatures. There were dinosaurs that stood taller. There were species that grew longer. There were land predators that appeared more ferocious beneath the sun. But Sarcosuchus was a combination of size and position. It was large, but it did not stand in the middle of the plain for everyone to see from a distance. It was large, but most of its body could be hidden by water. It was large, but it could remain so still that the riverbank still seemed peaceful. And in nature, a gigantic creature that can still hide always brings a very particular sense of unease. Murky water was its ally. Mud was its ally. The shadows of riverside trees were its ally. Drifting trunks of rotting wood were also its allies, because from a distance, part of Sarcosuchus's rough back might look no different from a water-soaked log. In a world without warning, sounds without maps, without fences, every creature living beside the river could only rely on instinct, scent, sound the memory of the herd, and the caution passed down through countless generations. But even then, the water always kept secrets that eyes on land could never fully read. The body of Sarcosuchus was built for that world. It was low, long, heavy, and close to the water. That shape was not made for sprinting across the plain in long pursuits. It belonged to another kind of life, slower, quieter, but no less dangerous. Its skin and the bony armor plates along its back made it seem like a living fortress drifting in the water. Each plate of armor was like a sign of time, of protection, of a body that had to survive in an environment where collisions, mudstone roots, and even other living creatures could all become part of daily existence. If a young Sarcosuchus once swam in this river, it was surely not born an emperor. It too would once have been smaller, more vulnerable, forced to avoid dangers larger than itself. But through the years, through seasons of rising and falling water, through the times it found food, escaped enemies, survived droughts and floods, that body slowly grew. Not in a few days, like a nightmare bursting into existence, but through time, through the persistence of survival. Each year added a little more. Each season left a trace. Each stage of life brought it closer to the form that other creatures along the river would have to beware. A fully grown Sarcosuchus may not have needed to appear often in order to be felt. In an ancient ecosystem, the presence of a large predator can exist even when it is not seen. A stretch of bank where fewer creatures dare to come close. A section of river where a herd of herbivores stands longer before lowering its head to drink. A body of water that smaller species avoid as the day begins to darken. These changes do not happen because they understand Sarcosuchus the way humans understand a name. They do not name it. They do not tell legends about it. But their bodies know that some places require more caution than others. Sarcosuchus did not rule the river like a king sitting on a throne. It ruled by blending into its own territory. It was not separate from the water. It was part of the water. When lying still in the current, it almost became a dark section of the riverbed. When it breathed, the movement could be so slight that it made only a few faint ripples. When its eyes surfaced, they did not need to show much. Just a little above the water was enough to observe the world above, where light sent vibrations and the silhouettes of prey passed by like quiet signals. Its head is the part that is hardest to look away from. The snout is long, gradually widening, heavy, and lined with strong teeth. That jaw does not look slender, like that of a creature specialized only for catching small fish. It suggests a broader diet, a more flexible hunting opportunity in a river world rich with food sources. Large fish could be prey. Animals near the water could also become prey if the circumstances were favorable enough. But what matters is that we should not imagine Sarcosuchus as a machine constantly lunging at everything. Its terror lies in its ability to wait, in the fact that it does not need to waste energy, and in the way it can let the river do part of the work for it. When a creature that large lives in the water, the feeling of the surrounding environment also changes. A stretch of river is no longer just a place with fish and mud. It becomes a zone with depth, with upper and lower layers, with visible things and unseen things. On the surface, light reflects. Beneath the surface, shapes are distorted. On the bank, a creature may think it can observe everything. But from beneath the water, Sarcosuchus can observe in return in a different way, quieter, more hidden. Perhaps in the late afternoon when the sky begins to turn copper-colored, Sarcosuchus lies near a bend in the river. One side of the bank is lower than the other. Roots descend into the water, creating a zone of shadow. Decaying leaves drift slowly past the snout, that is almost motionless. Farther away, fish stir faintly in the deeper water. On the bank, fresh footprints are pressed into the mud. Everything is ordinary. The river still flows. Insects still fly. Other creatures continue living in their familiar rhythm. But in the middle of that ordinary scene, there is a mass of strength lying still. The silence of Sarcosuchus is not weakness, it is a strategy for life. In the world of land predators, strength often appears through movement, a charge, a chase, the thunder of hurried feet, a jaw opening wide in the light. But in the river, strength can appear through the opposite, by not moving, by keeping the surface from rippling too much, by letting prey believe that the riverbank is still only a riverbank, that water is still only water, and that the darkness beneath is only the shadow of trees. It is a very ancient kind of power, the power of an ambush predator that does not need to be seen in order to exist. Even so, in this chapter we have not yet entered the moment of attack. We have not yet gone deeply into the art of underwater ambush, because that belongs to the next part of the story. Here what matters more is becoming familiar with Sarcosuchus as a real creature, a real body in a real environment. It was not an imagined monster living outside the laws of nature. It was the result of those laws. A long, heavy body because the river could support it. A large jaw because that water offered many opportunities for feeding. A quiet way of life because murky water allowed stillness to become an advantage. Strong armor because surviving for a long time in the ancient world always required endurance. Imagine seeing it from far away for the first time. At first, you might not be sure it is a living creature. On the water's surface, there is only a long, dark, very low shape. It looks like a stranded tree trunk or a strip of raised mud. Then that shape moves very slowly. Not enough to make a loud sound. Not enough to throw water into the air. Just a slight movement, yet that movement changes everything around it. A few small fish scatter. A bird or flying reptile above shifts direction. The water closes behind it. And you understand that what you have just seen is not rotting wood. It is alive. In that moment, the size of Sarcosuchus becomes harder to believe than any number. A number may say 11 meters, 12 meters, many tons of weight. But imagination only truly understands when it is placed into the landscape. A long snout rising among decaying leaves. A body stretching through an entire shallow area. A tail disappearing into deeper water, leaving you unsure where it ends. A pair of eyes held above the surface, calmly watching the bank. It does not need to hurry. A creature like that does not live by haste. It lives by choosing the right moment, the right place, the right distance, right? And perhaps that is what makes Sarcosuchus different from many images of predators in our imagination. It does not make the ancient world louder. It makes that world quieter. Once we know that such a creature can exist beneath the water, we look at every river surface differently. A murky stretch of water is no longer simply murky water. A floating log is no longer just a log. A silence along the bank no longer feels entirely reassuring. The sense of danger does not come from sound, but from the fact that we are not sure we are seeing everything. In the river kingdom of the ancient Sahara, Sarcosuchus was such a truth. There is no need to exaggerate it into a monster without limits. No need to turn it into a mythical creature that devours everything in sight. the truth is already powerful enough. A giant crocodiliform, as long as a bus, weighing many tons, living in a river system full of fish dinosaurs and reptiles, able to lie motionless beneath murky water and wait for opportunity. That alone was enough to make the river a very different place. But Sarcosuchus was also not a creature separate from the rest of the ecosystem. It did not stand outside the world in order to spread fear over everything. It too had to live according to the rhythm of the river. It also depended on water, on temperature, on prey, on seasons, on changes in the muddy bank, and the current. When the waters rose, its territory may have expanded. When the waters receded, deeper areas became more important. When fish gathered, other opportunities appeared. When large animals came near the water's edge, the river gained new possibilities. It was a ruler of part of that world, yet it was still part of that world. Perhaps for many days, Sarcosuchus was only a long shadow in the water. It might bask on an empty stretch of bank when the sun grew warm. It might slide back into the water when large movement came too close. It might lie in deeper water when the day became too hot. It might move slowly through bends in the river, leaving heavy ripples behind. Every action carried a sense of economy. No waste, no haste. A large body requires great energy, and in nature, the creature that survives for a long time is not always the one that attacks the most, but the one that knows when to wait. And if we look at it from that angle, Sarcosuchus becomes even more fascinating. It is not only SuperCroc, a powerful and memorable nickname. It is the ancient river's answer to a very old question. In a world where life gathers around water, what kind of predator gains the greatest advantage? Not always the fastest runner, not always the loudest roarer. Sometimes it is the one that knows how to turn the water's surface into a curtain. Sometimes it is the one that lets mud tree shadows and current conceal its body. Sometimes it is the one that can wait longer than the caution of its prey. At the end of the day, when the light is only a faint streak on the river surface, Sarcosuchus almost disappears completely. The water darkens. The muddy bank cools. The small sounds of night begin to rise from the riverside vegetation. If you did not know better, you might think the river was asleep. But somewhere beneath the murky water, a gigantic body still lies there, silent as part of the riverbed, waiting according to a rhythm understood only by itself and the current. And from the moment Sarcosuchus appears, the river world of the ancient Sahara is no longer merely a fertile place. It becomes a kingdom with a ruler. Not a ruler in the human sense, not with a throne, not with territory drawn on a map, not with a cry of power, but with a silent presence in murky water, with a long jaw lying beneath the surface, with heavy armor submerged in darkness, with the ability to make every creature approaching the river's edge step a little more slowly, lift its head a little longer, and listen to the water a little more carefully. Once Sarcosuchus has appeared in the story, the ancient river is no longer merely a strip of water flowing through the green, humid land of the old Sahara. It becomes a place with another kind of depth, a place where every sound on the bank, every footstep in the mud, every silhouette lowering itself to drink, can be seen from below. And from here we begin to understand why the river's edge of the early Cretaceous was so dangerous. An afternoon beside the river may begin with images that seem utterly ordinary. Sunlight falls softly across the mudflat. Insects hover above the low bushes. Small rings of ripples spread when fish stir in the shallow water. Far away, a herd of plant-eating dinosaurs slowly passes through the vegetation along the bank. There is no great roar, no violent chase, no scene that warns of a coming tragedy. But for an underwater ambush predator, stillness itself is part of the trap. Sarcosuchus does not need to turn the river into a noisy battlefield. It does not need to rush in from far away like predators on the open plain. It does not need to waste energy on long pursuits where prey may flee, change direction, or rejoin the herd. Its strength lies elsewhere. It only needs to choose the right place, the right moment, and have enough patience to wait for the world above to step into its range on its own. That is the art of ambush, an art slower, colder, and far more silent than the image of hunting we often imagine. On land, prey can see danger from a greater distance. It can hear footsteps. It can smell a scent. It can notice dust, rising grass, shifting, or the silhouette of a predator coming closer. But at the river's edge, everything becomes more complicated. The surface of the water reflects light, blurring what lies beneath it. Murky mud conceals shape. Roots, dead leaves, and submerged trunks create dark patches that are difficult to distinguish. A creature standing on the bank may think it is looking down into the river, but in truth, it is only seeing the surface of another world. And Sarcosuchus from below can wait. It may lie close to the shallows where the riverbank lowers and the mud is softer. It may keep most of its body beneath the surface, exposing only its eyes and nostrils just enough. It may remain motionless for so long that other creatures begin to grow accustomed to the presence of a shadow. In murky water, a body many meters long does not necessarily need to appear clearly. It can become a dark streak, a log, a part of the riverbed, something the prey sees but does not understand. Because an ambush does not begin when the jaws close. It begins long before that. It begins when the predator chooses its position. It begins when the current hides its body. It begins when the prey gradually loses caution before a scene that seems ordinary. It begins when a herd of herbivores has passed down the same path to the water so many times without anything happening. Until on another day, a single individual steps just a little closer, lowers its head just a little more, and enters a patch of mud just a little deeper. The river's edge is not dangerous because it kills every creature that comes near. If that were true, no species would ever dare return. It is dangerous because it is both necessary and unpredictable. Water is something every living creature must seek. An animal can avoid a dense patch of vegetation. It can take another path across an open stretch of ground. It can keep its distance from the scent of a predator. But it cannot live forever without drinking. The river, therefore, becomes the place where the need to survive pushes prey close to danger. Sarcosuchus rules that boundary, the boundary between land and water, between the place where prey still stands firmly and the place where its feet begin to sink, between the visible world and the world hidden by water, between one safe step and one step too close. Imagine a riverbank at the end of the low water season. The main current has drawn back, exposing broader mudflats. On the ground, the mud is not completely dry. It is still soft, still holding footprints, still able to grip the feet of heavy creatures. The paths down to the water have gradually been trampled into trails because many species use the same convenient stretch of bank. The low plants there have been grazed down. The earth has been pressed flat. The scents of many creatures overlap in the humid air. To prey, this is a familiar place. To an ambush predator, it is an ideal one. Because wherever prey appears again and again, time begins to favor the one that knows how to wait. A fully grown Sarcosuchus does not need to be lucky every second. It only needs to appear at the right moment often enough across its long life. A herd of dinosaurs coming to drink, a large fish entering the shallows, a small reptile crawling down the bank, a weaker individual falling behind, a young animal without enough experience stepping too far down. Not all of these moments will end in a successful hunt. But in nature, success does not need to come every day. It only needs to come often enough to sustain a large body from one season to the next. That is why patience becomes a weapon. We often think of weapons as teeth, jaws, weight, and armor. And with Sarcosuchus, all of those things matter. But if we look only at the body, we miss another weapon, one even more silent, the ability to do nothing. Lying still is not weakness. Lying still saves energy. Lying still lets the current erase shape. Lying still allows prey to approach on its own. Lying still turns the piece of the landscape into a layer of camouflage. In a murky river, even a small movement can betray a predator. A tail thrashing too strongly will disturb the water. A shift made too early will scatter fish. A back rising too high may draw the prey's attention. And so the art of ambush does not lie only in the force of the attack, but in the ability to control everything before that attack. Waiting for the right direction of the current. Waiting for tree shadows to soften the light. Waiting for prey to lower its head. Waiting for the prey's feet to enter mud that is harder to pull free from. Waiting until the distance between it and the water becomes a distance that can no longer be saved. When that moment comes, everything may happen very quickly. Not quickly like a long chase, but quickly like a door slamming shut. The still surface of the water suddenly breaks. A dark mass surges upward from below. Long jaws open. Water bursts into the air. Mud is churned up. The sound of insects leaves, and flowing water is cut through by a violent impact. Then in just a moment, clear images become chaos. Large ripples spread outward. The muddy bank slides down. Nearby creatures startle and scatter. And after a short while, the surface begins to close again, as though it wants to hide what has just happened. But it is important not to imagine every hunt by Sarcosuchus as a scene exaggerated by film. We do not know exactly how each attack unfolded. Fossils tell us about body shape, size, jaw structure, habitat, and reasonable inferences about lifestyle. But fossils do not record every second of an ambush. So when we speak of Sarcosuchus, we need to maintain respect for what remains unknown. It could hunt large fish. It could attack animals near the water when the opportunity was favorable. It could make creatures approaching the river's edge face a very real risk. But it was not a mythical machine that always defeated everything. That truth itself makes it even more frightening. Because in real life, danger rarely appears as a perfect monster. It appears as a possibility lying in the water, a possibility that forces prey to stay alert, a possibility that does not need to happen every day in order to change the behavior of an entire living area. If only a few individuals are dragged down at familiar water paths, if the smell of blood once spreads through the mud, if the instinct of the herd remembers that there are stretches of river where it should not remain too long, then Sarcosuchus has become part of the survival psychology of that world. The river's edge, then, is not dangerous only for weak creatures. It is dangerous for every creature that does not fully understand its boundary. A large animal may be powerful on land, But when it lowers its head to the water, its neck drops, its field of vision changes, and its center of gravity shifts. A heavy foot may be steady on dry ground, but it can sink into soft mud. A massive body may be an advantage in a confrontation on land, but at the water's edge, that same size can also make turning away slower. It is a place where familiar strength is placed under different conditions. The river does not need to defeat the prey with its own strength. It only needs to make the prey less certain. Mud slows the feet. Water blurs the eyes. A sloping bank throws balance off. Reflection conceals the shadow. And Sarcosuchus uses all of it. In nature, a good predator is not always the strongest one if placed in the middle of an open field. A good predator is the one that knows how to use the environment to turn its own strengths into the greatest possible advantage. For Sarcosuchus, that environment is the river. It does not need to run faster than every dinosaur. It does not need to win every confrontation on land. It only needs to be in the water, where its heavy body is supported, where silence becomes useful, and where prey is forced to come close in order to drink feed or cross. We might see it lying near a bend where the current slows and deeper water lies close to the bank. Or it may choose an area covered by roots where darkness blurs the head that rests just above the surface. It may be near a familiar descent to the water where many footprints have been pressed into the mud over many days. It may not be there constantly, but often enough to turn that place into a point of unease on the invisible map of riverside creatures. And perhaps the most important thing to say is that Sarcosuchus does not need to understand these things in the way humans do. It does not need to think in language. It does not need a complicated plan. Its body, its instincts, and its experience of living in the river are enough to create fitting behavior. The creatures that survive longer repeat what works better. Those that choose the wrong position, attack at the wrong time, or waste too much energy may not live long enough. Across many generations, the river sharpens habits, and those habits become part of an ambush way of life. The art of underwater ambush, then, is not a single action. It is an entire way of existing formed by many small elements working together. From the way Sarcosuchus's body lies low in the water, the way its eyes and nostrils are placed high so it can observe and breathe while the rest of its body remains hidden, to the way its long jaws can reach prey at very close range. Its armor and heavy body help it endure impact. The river conceals sound. The muddy bank may hold the prey's feet for one extra moment. All of these things combine into a silent power, a power that creatures on land only truly feel once they have come too close. Let us return to the image of an animal coming down to drink, without needing to name exactly what species it is. It may be a large herbivore, a young individual, or simply a smaller riverside creature, thirsty after a hot, humid afternoon. It steps down the bank. The mud sinks slightly beneath its feet. It stops, raises its head, and listens. Nothing seems unusual. Insects still sing, leaves still move. The water remains still. Then it lowers its head. That very moment, the moment it lowers its head, is the moment the river's edge becomes the most dangerous place. Not because death is certain to come, but because the possibility of death is already very close, separated only by a layer of water, a shadow, a movement that the eyes on the bank have not yet had time to understand. If nothing happens, the animal will finish drinking and leave. The riverbank will once again be the place that saved its life. But if Sarcosuchus is beneath the surface, if the position is right, If the distance is right, if the shadow has waited long enough, then that same riverbank will become the place where every advantage of life on land disappears. That is the subtle cruelty of nature. The same place can be a source of life in the morning and a trap in the afternoon. The same water surface can reflect the sky, but it can also hide teeth. So we can say that the river's edge in the world of Sarcosuchus is not merely a location, it is a test. Every creature that comes there must pass a test of caution, instinct, luck, and timing. Some pass, some do not. And those successes and failures create the rhythm of life along the ancient river. In the light at the end of the day, when a herd of herbivores leaves the water's edge and moves into the low vegetation, their footprints still remain in the mud. The river ripples lightly, then becomes still again. If an ambush has just occurred, the current will carry away most of the traces. If nothing has happened, the peace continues. But either way, the riverbank keeps its true nature, a place that never belongs entirely to safety. When night falls, that danger becomes even harder to read. Light disappears from the water's surface. The shapes of the riverside trees merge into darkness. Small sounds become clearer, but also harder to identify. A sound beneath the water may be a fish, it may be a drifting trunk, or it may be something else. In the dark, the river does not need to change much in order to become more frightening. It only needs to let the imagination of every creature on the bank fill in what cannot be seen. And somewhere in that darkness, Sarcosuchus may still be lying still, not always attacking, not always appearing, but always belonging to that place, belonging to murky water, to muddy banks, to quiet bends, and to the moment when prey thinks it is only drinking. That is the art of underwater ambush, not a continuous display of strength, but a harmony between body environment and time. Sarcosuchus is frightening not only because its jaws could close with tremendous force, but because before those jaws closed, the entire river had helped it disappear. Water blurred it, mud hid it, tree shadows covered it. The familiarity of the riverbank made prey believe this place was still as safe as it had been on previous days. And when everything happened, it happened too quickly for the world to explain. Afterward, the river flows again. Insects sing again. Leaves fall into the water again. Ripples spread and vanish. The muddy bank lies still beneath the evening light, as if nothing had ever happened. But in the memory of the ecosystem, in the instincts of the creatures that remain alive, the river's edge is never just the river's edge again. It is the boundary between two worlds, one world of light land and footsteps, and another murky world below, where a gigantic ambush predator can wait longer than the caution of its prey. And at that boundary, the early Cretaceous created one of the most terrifying hunting stages of the prehistoric world. In the world of the early Cretaceous dinosaurs were the largest silhouettes upon the land. They crossed the plains, leaving deep footprints in the mud. They made low plants tremble as their heavy bodies moved past. They changed the very landscape simply by feeding, moving, gathering into herds, and then scattering again beneath the humid sunlight of an ancient Sahara that had not yet become a desert. Seen from a distance, we might think the land belonged to them. And to a certain extent, that was true. On land, many dinosaurs were formidable creatures, possessing size, weight, speed, or numbers great enough to make many predators hesitate. But the river was not the land, and that is what makes this chapter different, because there were moments when even creatures that seemed to rule the world had to step into a place that did not fully belong to them. They had to drink water. They had to cross muddy banks. They had to lower their heads toward the river. They had to place part of their bodies upon the boundary between land and water, where the light became dimmer, where the mud beneath their feet could betray them, and where a gigantic creature like Sarcosuchus might be waiting beneath the murky water. When we speak of Sarcosuchus hunting dinosaurs, we should not immediately imagine a violent, great battle between two enormous monsters in broad daylight like a scene from legend. Nature is usually more subtle than that. It is rarely fair. It does not arrange two opponents face to face so they can measure strength against strength. A real hunt often begins with the disadvantage of the prey. A wandering individual, an inexperienced juvenile, a wounded animal, a moment of distraction, one step too close. And for Sarcosuchus, such moments were most likely to appear at the water's edge. Imagine a herd of plant-eating dinosaurs moving toward the river in the late afternoon. The sunlight has softened, but the heat still lingers in the mud and in the trunks along the bank. They move slowly without panic, because this is not the first time the herd has followed this path. The larger individuals walk in front, their heavy bodies pushing through the low vegetation. Younger individuals move in the middle or behind, sometimes stopping to graze on patches of plants close to the ground. The herd's footprints press into the mud-flat new tracks, overlapping old ones, forming a soft road that leads down to the water. From the perspective of the land, that dinosaur herd seems safe. Numbers are a form of protection. Large bodies are a form of protection. The experience of the herd is a form of protection. But as they approach the water's edge, the world begins to change in a very subtle way. The individuals standing on the outer edges must watch in more directions. Those lowering their heads to drink temporarily lose part of their field of vision. The young may be hidden behind the bodies of larger individuals. The mud beneath their feet is not as firm as dry ground. And the water in front of them, though silent, never reveals everything beneath it. Down below, if Sarcosuchus is lying in wait, it does not need to see the entire herd the way a human would see a wide scene. It only needs one opportunity close enough. A neck lowering down. A front foot placed in the wrong spot. A young body stepping out from the protection of the group. An animal failing to recognize that the water before it is deeper than it appears. For an ambush predator, the prey does not need to be completely weak. It only needs to be weak for one moment. And the river's edge creates moments like that. A plant-eating dinosaur may be a ruler of the open ground, but when it lowers itself to drink, its posture changes. The head drops. The neck reaches forward. Weight shifts toward the front. The eyes look down toward the water or become confused by reflected light. The ears still hear, the nose still smells, but attention is divided. It is doing something necessary for survival, and that very necessity forces it to accept risk, if only for a brief time. Sarcosuchus does not need to surge out from the middle of a wide river. It can wait where the bank is low, where deeper water lies closer to the land, where roots and darkness hide the head. It can let the murky current cover its back. It can remain motionless for a long time until the animals on the bank see nothing more than an ordinary river surface. Then when the distance closes, when the prey bends low enough, when part of its body enters the danger zone, the moment of the water can arrive so quickly that every advantage on land has no time to come into play. A great sound may tear through the afternoon, not a long roar, not the sound of feet in pursuit, but the sound of water exploding mud being thrown upward and a gigantic body rising out of silence. The long jaws of Sarcosuchus open at very close range. It does not need to run far. It does not need to chase the herd. It is already waiting in the place where the prey has to come. And if the strike lands, everything that follows unfolds in chaos. The water grows muddier, the bank slides down. The herd recoils in panic, and fresh footprints crush the old ones beneath them. What is frightening is that the attack may end far more quickly than the waiting that came before it. Sarcosuchus may lie motionless for hours, but the moment of action is measured in seconds. For prey on the bank, there is no time to understand, no time to analyze, no time to turn strength on land into an effective response. Everything happens at the most unfavorable boundary where water pulls downward, mud holds fast, and the jaws have already come too close. But we must also keep the truth in its proper place. Not every adult dinosaur was easy prey. A large, healthy individual standing firmly and alert may have been too risky a target. An ambush predator, even a gigantic one, must still operate according to the instincts of survival. Injury could cost it the ability to hunt. A kick, a violent struggle, a collision from the wrong angle, all of these could be dangerous. And so, Sarcosuchus likely did not hunt with limitless recklessness. It hunted through opportunity. That opportunity might have been a juvenile standing in the wrong place, a weakened individual falling behind the herd, a smaller animal coming down to drink as darkness began to gather, a plant-eating dinosaur lowering its head for too long at a low bank, a carcass drifting down the river, prey already wounded by another creature. The river did not only create direct attacks, it created many kinds of food, many situations, many opportunities that a large and patient creature could use. For that reason, the image of Sarcosuchus hunting dinosaurs should not be understood as a daily repeated battle between two equal powers. It should be understood as a colder, ecological truth. When dinosaurs stepped into the water, they were no longer in the environment where they were strongest. And when a gigantic creature like Sarcosuchus was waiting beneath that surface, the balance of power could shift in a single breath. Imagine a young individual within the herd. It is not yet large enough to possess the weight of the adults. It is also not experienced enough to read every sign of the riverbank. When the herd stops to drink, it squeezes through a narrow gap and steps down into slightly deeper mud. It is thirsty. It lowers its head. Beside it, the larger individuals are still there, seeming to form a wall of safety. But if even a small opening appears between those bodies, if it moves closer to the water than the rest, the world below may already recognize an opportunity. Perhaps nothing happens. That is what makes the scene feel even more real. In nature, danger is very often close without erupting. The young animal drinks, raises its head, shakes a few drops of water from its muzzle, and returns to the herd. Sarcosuchus, if it is there, may still remain motionless. The distance is not enough. The angle is not right. The current is not favorable. The prey has not separated far enough. A long-lived predator does not attack simply because it can. It attacks when the opportunity is good enough. But on another day, everything may shift just slightly. A young animal wanders a few steps farther. A larger individual blocks its view. The water is calmer. The tree shadows are darker. The mud is softer. Sarcosuchus is lying closer. And when that moment comes, the river can change from a place that saves life into a trap. The herd will react by instinct. Those nearby jerk backward. Mud flies beneath their feet. A few younger individuals run after the bodies of the larger ones. Sound spreads through the humid air. Small creatures on the bank scatter. Fish beneath the water vanish into deeper places. For a few seconds, the entire riverbank becomes a vortex of motion. Then gradually, everything settles. The herd leaves the water's edge, but not with the calm rhythm it had when it arrived. They move faster, closer together, and the mud behind them holds new traces, deeper, more chaotic than before. The river becomes still again. That is almost the most frightening part. After all the chaos, the water knows how to return to normal. The ripples fade. The mud settles. Insects fly again above the bushes. The evening light falls across the river as though nothing had happened. But the memory of the herd may have changed. That path down to the water is no longer the same. The smell of mud, the sound of water, the feeling of a low bank, all of it may become tied to a vague unease that the animals do not need to name. For dinosaurs, danger does not mean they fear in the way humans tell stories. They do not think of Sarcosuchus as a monster from legend. They have no language to say that an ambush predator waits beneath the water. But their bodies can learn through instinct. The herd may become more cautious along certain stretches of bank. The young may remain closer. Adult individuals may lift their heads longer between drinks. Life does not need words in order to change behavior. It only needs to survive enough risks. And that is how a predator can influence an entire landscape without needing to appear constantly. Sarcosuchus does not always attack. It does not always succeed, but its presence makes the water's edge a different place. The river is no longer only a source of life. It is a place where every creature must calculate. Plant-eating dinosaurs need water, but water may hide jaws. A large herd has strength, but a muddy bank can divide it. A young individual may stand among adults, but one step too far outside the group can bring it much closer to danger. Seen from a distance, this scene reveals a very ancient paradox. Giant creatures walk upon the land like masters of the world, yet they must bow their heads before a river. They need it in order to live, but at the very moment they come to it, they become more vulnerable. The river does not care who rules on land. It creates its own laws, and under those laws, the one that knows how to wait in the water can gain an advantage even over bodies larger than itself on the ground. Perhaps an adult Ouranosaurus was not a target Sarcosuchus could easily handle. Perhaps a strong Lurdosaurus standing firm at the bank was not a good opportunity. Perhaps a full herd made any attack more difficult. But nature does not require perfect targets. It only requires individuals at the wrong moment. A juvenile, a weak one, a slow one standing in a position at the riverbank that favors the predator. In that world, not every dinosaur was hunted, but no dinosaur could consider the water's edge entirely harmless. This is also why Sarcosuchus does not need to be turned into an unrealistic monster. The truth of it is already compelling enough. A crocodiliform longer than many modern crocodiles living in a river environment where dinosaurs and large fish appeared together with jaws strong enough to hold large prey and the ability to use murky water like a curtain of concealment. Place it at the right riverbank at the right time with prey that has let its guard down, and the story becomes tense without exaggeration. Let us return to the river as the sun nears the horizon. A herd of dinosaurs has finished drinking and is moving slowly away into the low vegetation. Their footprints remain in the mud, some deep, some shallow, some stretched out from slipping. The water is still murky. A few leaves drift around the bend. Farther away, the sound of insects begins to thicken in the dark. If we did not know the story beneath the surface, this scene might seem peaceful. But now the listener knows that beneath that water, peace is never entirely simple. Sarcosuchus may be there, or it may not. That uncertainty is the true nature of the trap. If every bend of the river held a predator-prey would no longer come. If every drink ended in death, the herd could not survive. But if danger appears only sometimes, if it lies within a layer of murky water, if it depends on timing position and carelessness, then the river's edge continues to pull every living thing back, and every return is a wager. Dinosaurs wager with their thirst. Sarcosuchus wagers with its patience. The river remains the silent witness to both. In that world, there is no good and evil, no villain and victim in the human sense. There is life that must continue. There are bodies that need energy. There are herds that need water. There are predators that need to eat. There are flood seasons and low water seasons that wait for no one. Sarcosuchus does not hunt because it is cruel. Dinosaurs do not go down to the water because they are foolish. All of them are simply living within the conditions the ancient world has set before them. And for that very reason, the story becomes even deeper. A dinosaur may be powerful upon the land, but strength always belongs to the environment that suits it. When it steps down to the water's edge, it enters the meeting place of two sets of laws. The law of the land is still present, but weaker. The law of the water begins to grow stronger. Mud grips the feet. The surface hides the eyes. The current swallows sound. And beneath it all, Sarcosuchus may be waiting like a part of the river itself. Perhaps many times dinosaurs drank and left safely. Perhaps for many days, Sarcosuchus did not attack at all. Perhaps the river passed through countless peaceful afternoons with nothing but falling leaves, stirring fish, and new footprints in the mud. But if just one day is different, one moment is different, one animal stands in the wrong place, the story can change direction. That is what makes the river's edge so terrifying, not the certainty of death, but the nearness of possibility. And when we say that Sarcosuchus hunted dinosaurs, we are speaking of that very moment, the moment when rulers of the land stepped into the water, the moment when a gigantic body lowered itself before the river, the moment when a land creature believed it was only drinking, while below another had turned silence into an advantage. Afterward, when darkness covers the ancient river, when the dinosaur herd has vanished behind patches of low vegetation, when the muddy bank holds only footprints and faint slip marks, the water becomes calm again. It reflects the evening sky. It carries decaying leaves. It hides what has just happened, or what might have happened. And somewhere beneath that murky layer, Sarcosuchus still belongs to its kingdom, needing no roar, no display, only waiting for the next time a giant of the land steps into the underwater trap. When the story has brought us to the water's edge, when we have seen how Sarcosuchus turned the river into a silent trap, it is perhaps easy to forget that it did not live alone. No predator truly exists in a vacuum. No monster becomes frightening if around it there is no prey, no opponent, no competitor, no current, no forest, no dry season, no flood season, and no small, nameless creatures helping to keep that world in motion. And so, to fully understand the kingdom of Sarcosuchus, we must take a small step back, not only to look at the jaws beneath the water, but to look at the entire river of the ancient Sahara, where many creatures shared a living space that was both abundant and filled with uncertainty. Imagine another morning on the land of Niger around 110 million years ago. Mist still lies low over the floodplain. The sun has not yet risen high, and the light is only strong enough to cast a pale golden color over the river. Water moves slowly through wide bends. In some places, the river surface is flat, as if asleep. In other places, small ripples reveal that fish are moving beneath it. Along the bank, soft mud still preserves the footprints of the previous night. There are small tracks, large tracks, long trails left by creatures that crawled across the ground, and deep hollows made by some heavy body that descended to drink while the sky was still dark. This is not an empty land. It is a living kingdom, a kingdom without walls, without a throne, without written laws. Yet it still has an order of its own. That order is not created by words, but by need. Whoever needs water will come to the river. Whoever needs soft plants will stay close to the floodplain. Whoever hunts fish will read the surface of the water. Whoever hunts creatures along the bank will wait where the mud lies low. Whoever is weaker will try to move with the herd hide among the plants or avoid open spaces that are too dangerous. In that world, Nigersaurus is one of the most distinctive silhouettes. It does not resemble the towering giant dinosaurs that often appear in human imagination. It is lower, closer to the ground, with a wide mouth and teeth adapted for grazing low vegetation. Seen from afar through the morning mist, we might see it moving slowly across the floodplain like a gentle creature belonging to a carpet of soft plants. Its head hangs low. Its body is not as massive as some other large herbivores, but still large enough to leave clear footprints in the damp earth. It moves with other individuals grazing on patches of young plants, as though harvesting a green field nourished by the river. Farther away, across the open land and the bands of vegetation along the water, Ouranosaurus and Lurdosaurus are also present in this picture. Ouranosaurus has a more striking appearance with a shape that would make it easy to recognize within the ancient landscape. Lurdosaurus, by contrast, suggests something heavy, low, and solid, like a slow-moving mass of life passing through mud and vegetation. These herbivores are not copies of one another. They differ in shape, movement, feeding position, and perhaps even in their daily habits. But they all share one important thing. All of them depend on the land created by the river. The river feeds the plants. The plants feed the herbivorous dinosaurs. The herbivorous dinosaurs, in turn, feed an entire layer of danger behind them. That is how this kingdom works. No creature exists entirely alone. The footprints of a herbivore herd are not merely footprints. They are an invitation to predators. A patch of plants grazed close to the ground is not only the sign of a meal, it shows where the herd often returns. A muddy path crushed by many feet is not only a road down to the water, it is a place where many bodies must pass. And in nature, wherever many bodies pass through, again and again, sooner or later, that place becomes somewhere predators learn to wait. Suchomimus enters this world as a kind of danger very different from Sarcosuchus. If Sarcosuchus is the shadow beneath the water, Suchomimus is the silhouette along the riverbank. It is a large predatory dinosaur associated with waterside environments with a long snout that makes us think of the ability to catch fish. It is not a predator belonging only to dry plains. It seems to belong to the water's edge, where land and river meet, where fish might thrash near the bank, where animal carcasses might drift in, and where smaller prey sometimes appear between the mud flat and the low vegetation. Imagine Suchomimus in the late noon. Sunlight falls across its back, stretching its shadow over the riverbank. It does not move in haste. Each step placed into the mud leaves a deep mark clearer than the tracks of smaller creatures. Its long head points toward the water. It pauses beside a shallow bend, listening or watching the small ripples. A large fish may have just passed near the bank. A movement in the water may make it tilt its head. It is a predator, but in this kingdom, even predators must be careful. Because beside the river, it is not the only one that knows how to hunt. Perhaps Suchomimus and Sarcosuchus did not often confront each other directly in the imagined battles humans like to create. Nature does not always need to turn two large predators into opponents in a loud duel. The tension between them could be far more subtle. They both exploit a waterside world. They may both be interested in fish carcasses, small prey, or stretches of bank rich with opportunity. They may avoid one another more often than they fight. A large land creature, like Suchomimus, has reason not to step too deeply into water where Sarcosuchus holds the advantage, and Sarcosuchus does not need to take risks if those risks bring no benefit. Suchomimus may control the riverbank in the way of a creature that walks, observes, and searches for opportunities. Sarcosuchus controls the water in the way of a motionless shadow. Nigersaurus controls the low vegetation by grazing it day after day. Lordosaurus and Ouranosaurus leave the impression of heavy bodies upon the damp ground. Large fish occupy the deeper channels. Turtles lie on warm mud, slow and patient. Flying reptiles glide above the river surface, seeing the world from another layer of space. Each creature holds one part of the picture. Each part has its own role, but no part is entirely safe. Beneath the river surface, fish are not merely background details. They are a source of life for many predators. Some fish are large enough to make the water churn strongly when they change direction in the shallows. Schools of smaller fish move together like a faint silver cloud in the murky water. There are creatures that live near the bottom, hiding in mud, slipping around submerged roots. Every movement they make can trigger a response from another creature. A school of small fish scattering may signal that a predator is below. A large fish leaping can draw the attention of Suchomimus on the bank. A patch of water suddenly becoming still can make nearby creatures more alert. Meanwhile, turtles and smaller reptiles form a slower layer of life. They are not as loud as dinosaurs, not as impressive in size as Sarcosuchus, but they help make the river crowded with life. A turtle basking on the mudflat might look like a living stone. A smaller crocodiliform may crawl across the water's edge, leaving a long trail behind it. A snake, or some other small creature, may vanish into the low vegetation before the eye has time to catch it. The ancient world did not belong only to giants. It was also woven from countless smaller lives, quieter, less visible, but no less important. And above all of this, the sky is not empty either. Flying reptiles may glide over the river region, their wings stretched across the warm air. From below, their shadows slide over the water like brief dark streaks. A small fish may startle. A creature along the bank may lift its head. For a few seconds, the entire river recognizes that danger does not come only from water or land. It may also pass from above. A kingdom like this does not have only one direction of danger. It has many layers. The layer of water, the layer of muddy banks, the layer of low vegetation, the layer of air, and every creature living here must learn to read many kinds of signals at once. That is why calling this a kingdom of monsters does not mean every creature is savage or gigantic. It means that world is filled with unusual forms, strange adaptations, and ways of life that today we can only reconstruct from bones, teeth, traces, and sediment. Nigersaurus, with its wide mouth, death, and habit of grazing close to the ground. Suchomimus, with the form of a waterside hunter. Sarcosuchus, with its gigantic body submerged in murky water. Other heavy herbivores passing across the floodplain. Large fish beneath the surface. Turtles, flying reptiles, smaller crocodiliforms. All of them make the ancient Sahara feel like a world both familiar and alien, like a dream nature once dreamed long before human beings appeared. But what matters most is that they did not merely coexist by standing beside one another. They coexisted by influencing one another. When Nigersaurus and other herbivores grazed the riverside plants, they changed the vegetation. When the vegetation changed, the shelter of smaller creatures changed as well. When smaller creatures changed position, the predators that hunted them followed. When fish gathered in the shallows, Suchomimus might appear closer. When Suchomimus appeared, smaller creatures on the bank might slip away. When herbivore herds descended to drink, the mud of the bank was trampled, creating more familiar paths down to the water. And when there were more familiar paths down to the water, Sarcosuchus gained another place to wait. Nature is a network like that. A small movement in one place can create consequences somewhere else. A season of rising water can expand the feeding grounds of fish, but it can also change the routes taken by herbivore herds. A dry season can make the water recede, forcing creatures closer to the remaining deep river channels, increasing both opportunity and danger. A tree trunk falling into the water can become shelter for young fish, a resting place for turtles, and also an object that blocks the view of prey. A collapsed riverbank can create deep water close to land, forcing large creatures that come to drink to stand nearer to the dangerous edge. Perhaps on a peaceful day, if we only glanced across it, this world would look strangely ordinary. A herd of Nigersaurus feeding near low vegetation. Farther away, a few larger herbivores moving slowly across the floodplain. Suchomimus standing beside the water, motionless for a moment, as if waiting for fish to surface. Turtles basking in the sun, flying reptiles gliding through the sky. The river flowing steadily, carrying decaying leaves and mud. No great battle, no terrifying roar. No scene warning us that this is a dangerous place. But that ordinariness is only the surface of a fierce world, because everything is living close to the edge. A herbivore herd only needs to separate too far for one individual to become vulnerable. A predator only needs to be injured to lose its advantage. A fish only needs to swim into the shallows at the wrong time to be caught. A young animal only needs to stand in the wrong place at the bank to disappear. A creature in the sky only needs to swoop too low to meet danger from something else. No place in this kingdom belongs entirely to peace. There are only temporary spaces of calm between the needs of survival, and that is what makes the ancient Sahara different from the silent desert of today. Today, when we look at a wide stretch of sand, we may feel that the place is empty. But 110 million years ago, this land was filled with living relationships. Space was not empty, but dense with signals. The smell of water, the smell of mud, the smell of bodies, the sound of insects, the sound of fish thrashing, the sound of footsteps, the sound of leaves being grazed, the sound of water striking the bank. Every small sound belonged to some creature, some action, some risk. In the afternoon, when the light turns warmer, that kingdom begins to appear like a slow-moving painting. Nigersaurus still lowers its head close to the ground, grazing the low vegetation in repeated movements. Suchomimus passes along a distant stretch of bank, its shadow lengthening across the mudflat. A large fish thrashes powerfully in the water, breaking the river surface before it closes again. Turtles slowly leave their basking places. A few flying shadows move overhead, gliding past and disappearing toward the light. And in the murkier water, where the river curves beneath the shade of trees, Sarcosuchus may still be lying still as part of the riverbed. Here, death is not always a failure of the ecosystem. It is part of the flow. A captured fish feeds a predator. A large creature dying beside the bank may become food for many others. A herbivore herd causes low vegetation to regrow in a different way. A predator disappearing may open opportunity for something smaller. Life in this kingdom does not stand still. It constantly exchanges, transforms, disappears, and is born again. The river is where this process appears most clearly, because water both nourishes and carries away, both conceals and preserves. And within all those layers of life, Sarcosuchus remains the symbol of the murky water. But it does not eclipse every other creature. On the contrary, those other creatures are what give it meaning. Without Nigersaurus and other herbivores coming near the bank, the river would offer fewer opportunities. Without large fish, a part of the underwater world would be poorer. Without Suchomimus, we would not see clearly the complexity of predators sharing the edge of the water. Without turtles, smaller reptiles, insects, plants, and mud, that kingdom would lose the depth of real life. It is a river kingdom operating day after day with thousands of small events that fossils can never fully record. A young animal surviving the night. A herd changing route because the riverbank is too soft. A Suchomimus ignoring an opportunity because the position is unfavorable. A large fish escaping from shallow water. A turtle sliding into the river before being noticed. A Sarcosuchus waiting an entire afternoon without attacking. These things may leave no trace in stone, but they are part of the life that once existed. When night falls, the monster kingdom of the ancient Sahara does not sleep completely. It only changes rhythm. Daytime creatures retreat into safer places. Sounds feel closer because darkness narrows vision. The river turns black, reflecting only a few faint streaks of light from the sky. The sound of fish thrashing seems louder. The sound of mud shifting beneath the foot of some creature becomes clearer. The riverside trees sink into darkness. And in the murky water, every shape becomes harder to distinguish. This is the monster kingdom of the ancient Sahara, not because this place is filled only with savage creatures, but because here there are great bodies, strange adaptations, lives woven together, dangerous boundaries, and a river that both nourishes and tests everything. Suchomimus moves along the riverbank like a hunting shadow of land and water. Nigersaurus lowers its head beside the low carpet of plants, gentle yet never separate from danger. Oranosaurus and Lurdosaurus leave heavy footprints across the damp floodplain. Large fish move in the deep current. Turtles and small reptiles rest in the quiet spaces of mud and sunlight. Flying reptiles cross the sky. And Sarcosuchus, more silent than all of them, holds the darkest part of the river. But no kingdom lasts forever. No matter how powerful it is, no matter how crowded with life, no matter how many gigantic creatures the river once nourished, time always flows in its own direction. And ahead in this story, the water kingdom of Sarcosuchus will slowly move toward an ending, that no creature in that world could have foreseen. No kingdom lasts forever. Whether it is a kingdom of human beings built from stone walls and names carved onto ancient steles, or a kingdom of nature made from water, mud trees, dinosaur footprints, and silent hunting shadows beneath the river's surface, everything has its time. Everything once shone in its own way. And then slowly, almost impossible to notice, within one brief lifetime, time begins to change everything. The kingdom of Sarcosuchus was no different. There was a time when the place we now call the Sahara was crossed by ancient rivers. There were damp floodplains. There were trees along the water. There were large fish in the deep current. There was Nigersaurus lowering its head beside the low vegetation. There was Suchomimus walking along the riverbank. There were heavy herbivores moving across soft mud. And beneath the murky water, there was Sarcosuchus, the gigantic creature of the boundary between land and water, silently waiting in the world it had been born to rule. But an ecosystem is not something that stands still. It lives by very fragile balances. If the river changes course, if the water seasons shift, if the vegetation retreats, if prey moves elsewhere, or if the climate gradually turns toward a new state, the entire network that once seemed stable begins to tremble. At first, perhaps no creature notices anything at all. A dry season becomes slightly longer. A low, muddy area floods less than it did in previous years. A branch of the river is no longer as full as before. Trees along one stretch of bank grow thinner. Fish gather in deeper areas. Herbivore herds change their paths, searching for places where more vegetation remains. Predators follow that rhythm as well, not because they understand that the world is changing, but because their bodies must always follow food, water, and the chance to survive. Then those small changes repeat. A river may change direction. It cuts through one bank and leaves another behind. It builds up soil in one place and carves deeper into another. A stretch of water that was once deep becomes shallow. A floodplain that was once green is gradually left farther from the main current. Trees that once grew close to the water's edge now stand on drier ground. Pools in the dry season become fewer, narrower, or separated from one another for longer periods. For a creature that lives by the river, like Sarcosuchus, those changes are not small. A gigantic body needs a world wide enough, wet enough, rich enough in food, full enough of hiding places, and crossed often enough by prey moving through dangerous boundaries. If the river narrows, if deep water becomes rarer, if the crowded living banks no longer hold the same abundance, the advantage of an underwater ambush predator also begins to weaken. Sarcosuchus cannot carry the river with it. It belongs to that environment, and precisely because it belongs to that environment so deeply, its fate is tied to the fate of those ancient waters. First, the water changes, then the vegetation along the banks changes, then the herbivores change their routes. Large fish lose the waters they once knew. Smaller reptiles must search for other places. Suchomimus and other waterside predators no longer encounter the same food sources as before. The paths down to the water that were once filled with footprints gradually grow empty. The muddy banks that were once gathering places of life slowly lose that same crowded rhythm. An ecosystem does not collapse like a tower in a story. It can dissolve like mist beneath the light. Each connection weakens. Each habit loses its place. Each old path is left behind. And then one day, with no witness, no record, no bell ringing to announce it, that river is no longer the river of Sarcosuchus. It is a very quiet thought, because for as long as it lived, Sarcosuchus probably did not know. It belonged to an age that would end. It did not know that humans would one day call it SuperCroc. It did not know that its bones would be found in the desert. It did not know that its green, humid world full of mud and water would one day be imagined as something almost impossible to believe in the middle of the dry Sahara. To it each day was only the water before it, a familiar bank, a season of sun, a season of flood, a tree trunk drifting across the river's surface, a large fish entering the shallows, a herd of herbivores coming down to drink, a very long wait beneath murky water. Nature always lives in the present like that. Only we, those who come later, look back and call it the past. Across millions of years, the layers of mud that were once soft were gradually buried deep. Dead leaves, bones, teeth, scales, armor fragments, and footprints were covered by new sediment. The pressure of earth and stone compressed them. Minerals entered tiny spaces. What had once been living bodies slowly became fossils. What had once moved beneath the ancient sun gradually lay still in the darkness of stone. The river continued its story, but that story was no longer the same. Geological ages followed one another. Continents shifted. Climate changed. Seas advanced and retreated in different places. New ecosystems appeared. New species filled the spaces left behind by old ones. The world did not stop to mourn Sarcosuchus. It simply continued to change, as it had done long before any creature knew how to look up at the sky. And long, very long after the time of Sarcosuchus, North Africa continued to undergo even greater climatic transformations. It was not immediately after Sarcosuchus vanished that the Sahara became a sea of sand as we know it today. Between the world of the early Cretaceous and the modern desert lies an enormous span of time so vast that our imagination can hardly hold it. Landscapes changed again and again. Humid regions appeared, then withdrew. Periods of dryness expanded. Greener phases returned during other intervals. The Sahara, known to human beings today, is the result of a complex climatic history that came much, much later than the age of Sarcosuchus. That makes the story deeper, not weaker, because it shows that from river to sea of sand was not a simple straight line. It was a long journey through countless intermediate worlds. A land may once have held rivers in the early Cretaceous, then passed through many different ages before becoming part of a vast desert. The Earth does not change like a quick cut in a film. It changes through the rhythm of stone climate oceans, wind continents, and deep time. And within that rhythm of time, there are things that disappear from life, but do not disappear from the Earth. Sarcosuchus no longer swims in ancient rivers. Its eyes no longer rise above murky water. Its long snout no longer lies still among the shadows of trees. Its gigantic body no longer slides through mud, but a part of it remains, not as a roar, not as the memory of another creature, but as fossilized bone. A tooth, a fragment of jaw, a part of the skull, a bony armor plate that once lay along its back. Those silent fragments become small doorways through which humans much later can step into a lost world. Imagine that scene. There are no riverside forests anymore, no morning moisture, no Cretaceous insects flying over the floodplain, no dinosaurs crossing damp ground. There is only the modern desert, dry, vast, and blindingly bright. Wind moves across sand and stone. Sunlight falls upon cracked surfaces. A group of people crosses a land that seems empty. Then among rock and sand, a strange shape appears. Not an ordinary stone, not a piece of wood, but part of a creature that once lived in a river that vanished tens of millions of years ago. That moment is very special. Because when a fossil appears in the middle of the desert, it does not merely say that an animal died. It says that this entire place was once different. It says that sand was not the first story. It says that before silence, there was sound. Before dryness, there was water. Before the empty horizon, there were trees, mud footprints, and flowing rivers. It says that the Sahara is not only a desert. The Sahara is also an enormous archive of worlds covered by time. And it is here that the story of Sarcosuchus becomes almost mystical, even though it still belongs to science. A creature that once lay in water is now found in sand. A being that once ruled soft mud now lies still in dry stone. A jaw that once closed amid the sound of water is lifted beneath the desert sun. All of it feels as though the earth is reminding us that no place has only one face. A land can be sea, then river, then forest, then plain, then desert. A place can once nourish giant fish dinosaurs and predatory reptiles, and later become a place where humans must carry water in order to survive. A landscape that seems eternal is only one chapter in the very long history of the planet. And so when we ask why the kingdom of Sarcosuchus disappeared, the answer should not be reduced to one simple cause. Not one short sentence saying it vanished because the desert arrived. Not one single catastrophe swallowing everything in a day. Instead, it was a combination of time, environment, climate rivers, food competition, and very long geological changes. When the world that nourishes a species changes, that species must adapt, move, shrink its role, or eventually leave the story of life. Sarcosuchus belonged to a very specific kind of world, a world with rivers large enough, with murky water, with muddy banks, with fish, with animals near the water, with repeated ambush opportunities across many generations. When that world no longer maintained the same conditions, the place of Sarcosuchus was no longer the same either. And in natural history, even the most frightening creatures cannot defeat the disappearance of the very environment that created them. It is a very quiet truth, but a very deep one. Strength does not guarantee eternal existence. Size does not protect a species from time. A gigantic jaw can close around prey, but it cannot close around a changing climate. A thick layer of armor can resist impact, but it cannot resist the gradual disappearance of an old river. An ambush predator can wait longer than its prey, but it cannot wait longer than a world dissolving away from the conditions that allowed it to live. And then in the end, that kingdom remains only in stone. The river becomes sediment. Mud becomes a geological layer. Bones become fossils. The body becomes evidence. And the story, after so many millions of years of silence, is handed to those who know how to listen to stone. Perhaps this is why fossils always carry a very particular sadness. They do not only amaze us with their size, shape, or age. They make us fall silent because they are the remains of lives that will never return. When we look at a fossil fragment of Sarcosuchus, we are not looking only at an animal. We are looking at a lost river, a lost afternoon, a lost mudflat, a moment of hunting, resting, swimming, or surviving that is gone forever. We are looking at the truth that the earth once held worlds stranger than anything we could imagine, and then the earth itself buried them. But burial does not mean erasure. The Sahara hid the world of Sarcosuchus beneath sand and stone, but it did not completely destroy that memory. On the contrary, in a strange way, the desert helped preserve the silence of the past. The dryness of today allows old bones to emerge. Wind wears down rock. Sand shifts. Light falls upon layers of sediment. And small fragments of the river kingdom appear again, no longer alive, but still enough to tell us that it once existed. Imagine at the end of this journey that we are standing in the modern Sahara as the sun is setting. Before us are sandstone wind and a wide horizon. No ancient river flows in front of us. No Nigersaurus lowers its head to graze. No Suchomimus walks along the bank. No giant fish thrashes in murky water. No Sarcosuchus raises its eyes from the darkness. Everything has vanished from the surface of the world. But if we stand still long enough, if we allow imagination to be guided by science, the desert is no longer completely silent. In the wind, we may hear the sound of water from very far away. In the sand, we may imagine soft mud. In the dry rocks, we may see again the layers of sediment once laid down beneath a river. In the empty horizon, we may imagine the shadows of dinosaurs moving slowly through the evening light. And beneath a water surface that no longer exists, we may see the long shadow of Sarcosuchus lying still, as though its kingdom had only just sunk away a moment ago. That is the power of natural history. It does not only tell us what species once lived, how long they were, how heavy they were, or how they hunted. It teaches us to look at a present landscape through many layers of time. It teaches us to understand that beneath every land there are older worlds. Beneath a desert there may once have been rivers. Beneath stone there may once have been mud. Beneath silence there may once have been the breath of life. And the story of Sarcosuchus, from river to sea of sand, is a gentle but powerful reminder that every kingdom is temporary. Even the kingdom of a gigantic predator, even a river that once nourished astonishing creatures, even a world that seemed too vast to disappear. In the end, the water recedes. The mud turns to stone. The bones remain. Sand covers them. Wind passes over them, and the earth continues its long journey, carrying within itself secrets we are only beginning to learn how to read. And as tonight comes to a close, hold onto that image, a Sahara that is not only a desert, but a memory of water. A field of sand that is not merely empty, but covering a kingdom that once lived. And a Sarcosuchus that no longer lies beneath the river's surface, but still remains in fossil fragments, in layers of stone, and in the quiet question the past leaves behind for us. If the driest place could once have held rivers, if the quietest place could once have been full of living sound, then perhaps the earth is always deeper than what we see upon the surface. And beneath every layer of sand, perhaps there is still a river sleeping. And here our journey tonight through the ancient river kingdom of Sarcosuchus slowly comes to a close. From the image of the Sahara today dry, vast, and silent beneath the sun, we have traveled back into a lost world. A world where sand was once mud, where the desert once held rivers, where ancient waters nourished giant fish, predatory reptiles, plant-eating dinosaurs, and silent hunters hidden beneath the surface. We have seen Sarcosuchus not merely as a giant crocodile of the imagination, but as a creature that truly belonged to the river. It did not need to rule the sky. It did not need to run across the plains. It did not need to roar like predators of the land. Its power lay in patience, in a body that blended into murky water in the moment when prey lowered its head to drink and stepped into a world it could no longer control. Perhaps the most terrifying thing about Sarcosuchus was not only its size, but the way it reminds us that in nature, no place is ever completely safe. Even gigantic creatures can become fragile when they cross the boundary between solid land and deep water. If you have stayed with me all the way to the end of this story, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy prehistoric journeys, mythology, history, and ancient mysteries told in a slow bedtime voice, please subscribe to the channel and follow the fan page so you will not miss the next journeys. And which creature would you like us to explore on another night? Dinosuchus, Purosaurus, Spinosaurus, or another ancient monster that once made the prehistoric world stay alert? Leave a comment and let me know. I wish you a truly peaceful sleep, and I will see you again on the next journey.